Welcome, everybody, to this new episode of CCIR's Student Spotlight. With me today is Ishnoor Singh from Vivek High School in Chandigarh, India. Ishnoor is currently a 12th grade student, but while he was at CCIR, he was in 11th grade working with Dr. Jehun Elgin on a course called The Economics of Pandemics. For his final project, Ishnoor ended up doing a project centered around the economic analysis of economic resilience, comparing and contrasting different economies and how they fared under different kinds of shocks. So first things first, Ishnoor, welcome to the Student Spotlight series.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I want to begin by asking a little bit about sort of what initially brought you to think about doing research, and in particular to this course focused on the economics of pandemics.
Right. I had actually written one research paper before I finally started with CCIR, and that was something about, it was also centered around like the subject of economics. It was more about uh, analyzing income inequality in India. So and the very first time I did it, I just did it via searching on YouTube the various rules of writing a research paper, and I really liked how I did the entire process of writing one, and that is what drove me to, I started searching on Google various places or various organizations that could help me write a very good research paper, and that's how I came across CCIR.
Mm. Tell me a little bit about sort of what drew you in particular to economics, and this particular course focused on the economics of pandemics, finance policy, and modeling.
Right. So I was always quite interested in the subject of economics because that was one subject I could relate to a lot with, right? If you look at it from one perspective, economics is everywhere, even in small things like what like bargaining with a salesperson. You have economics in that, and to even like if you look at it at a very with a very global perspective, right? The entire world kind of like functions on various laws and principles of economics. So it was one subject that I was quite interested in, and I always wanted to study more about it. And I mean, yeah, and writing a research paper in such a vast subject further, I believe that it would further help me expand my knowledge and my horizons about economics as a whole.
So tell me a little bit, I guess, about this specific course then, because we do offer quite a lot of different economics courses. What did you guys sort of explore with regard to the economics of pandemics, and what sort of interested you within this space?
Yeah, so COVID-19, it happened like what, 4 years ago. So and it had a very severe economic impact on the entire world, right? So that when I was just searching through the list of all the various courses provided by CCIR, this was one course that really caught my attention. And I thought that if I do get in, it will be a great learning because these events, pandemics, they're not new to the world, right? They've happened before and they will happen in the future. So I believe that I really wanted to learn about a pandemic as a whole and the various economic impacts that it can have on the world.
So tell me a little bit about some of the specific modules that you guys did. Eventually, you sort of narrowed down in this question of economic resilience. What were some of the other major themes that you guys explored in thinking about how pandemics can affect economic systems?
Right. So my research mentor, that was Dr. Elgin, right? He had an immense amount of knowledge about the pandemic and the various impacts, its economics and all of that. So he had written a lot of research papers on it as well. And throughout the program, he was really talking about all of his research, and it was a very great teaching about it was a very great learning but it was very fun learning about from his experiences and
Hmm.
his research.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, excellent. Yeah, Jaehoon is really, I would say, one of our he has a really I don't know if you experienced this, but he has a really robust process whereby he helps students scaffold into writing their first research paper. So he has this huge slide deck on like how to actually generate research papers. What was it like sort of working with Jaehoon as you sort of embarked on the research process, sort of with a mentor this time?
Right. So I used to think that I know a lot about writing a research paper before I even started before I started working with Dr. Elgin. But I was so wrong because he taught me so much about everything, and it was as if I knew nothing about writing a paper. There are so many rules that you have to follow by, and honestly, had I not worked with Dr. Elgin, I wouldn't have I wouldn't have been able to write a research paper that I have written right now.
Hmm. Yeah. And what were some of the specific sort of differences in how you approached research with Dr. Elgin and how you were doing it sort of by yourself, I guess, mostly modeling off of YouTube and so on?
Yeah, so going back to the first research that I wrote, um, I I just hopped on to Google Scholar and I searched income inequality in India, and whatever papers came, I just sort of read them and kind of included them in my paper, and what and how I could like further improve and further add to the research topic. But the very first thing when I started working with Dr. Elgin, the very first thing he said that you don't straight away go to Google Scholar and search the very first.
Yeah.
You have to keep in mind the credibility of the research papers that you're referring to, right? That and a lot of other things like I learned that there was a way that there was a very specific way in which you had to cite your research papers, right? And even towards the end, where you maintain a list of all the references, I thought you could just put in references in any order, but especially for a research paper centered around economics, you have to like alphabetically list down all of your research papers that you've referred to. So yeah, that and a lot of other things. That
Hmm.
was quite,
Um,
yep.
Excellent. So maybe let's shift gears a little bit here to talk in particular about your research paper. So you ended up focusing on this project that looked at the resilience of different economies. Maybe you can begin by explaining sort of how you approached, how you ended up landing on this topic, and what exactly you were interested about this question.
Yeah. So like talking about the research as a whole, um, because Dr. Elgin was also he had a lot of knowledge about the pandemic and all of these economic shocks in and how the economies functioned during the pandemic. I was quite intrigued by the fact of how an economic shock like a pandemic could just disrupt the entire economy of the world. So that was one thing that really sort of led me to come up with such an idea. And then when the term economic shocks as a whole is very broad because it can be wars, it can be periods of famine, that can also be your economic shocks, pandemics, all of these. So I really had to cut down and be very specific about what I had to research. So because of that, I chose the pandemic, the very recent pandemic that was COVID, as the period of economic shock. And apart from that, the by the term economies, or the paper is titled how different economies bounce back from periods of shocks. So by the economies I refer to the various economic frameworks that exist in the world. These can be well, like the centrally planned economies, that is the country of China. Mixed economy, that is India. I chose India for that. And like free markets, that is the United States. So I researched about how these three countries reacted to COVID and how they eventually recovered from the pandemic.
So what did you end up finding? I'm curious, sort of when you looked at the bounce back between these three different models, what were some of the advantages and disadvantages in terms of economic resilience when comparing these three systems?
Yep. So like what the final conclusion that I drew from the research was that as the level of government intervention within a country's economy tends to increase, the rate and the speed at which a country recovers from an economic shock also increases. And I'll back that up with the example of China, right? China, the government intervention in China is very high. So, and because of this, the country was able to bounce back pretty quickly from the pandemic. In fact, China was the only country that showed a positive 2.5% growth rate during the year 2020, while all the other countries were experiencing growth rates that were in negative. And and if we compare that to the economic recovery of the United States, where there is little to no government intervention, the recovery of the states was very volatile, I would say, because in one economic quarter, the economy was growing, it was experiencing growth rates of like positive 32%, and in the very next quarter, it just went down by a negative 32%, and this just kept on going until the economy finally started to recover.
Hmm.
Yep.
So in thinking about these different models, how were you also thinking about the way in which, and I wonder if this is something, this might be a bit left field, but I wonder how considerations about the political system as well as the cultural system sort of interacted with these different economic models. Because China, of course, is essentially much more centrally planned economy, but of course they also just have a far more, let's say, authoritarian and sort of stringent form of government that's able to sort of exercise this level of power. I wonder whether you considered these other factors as well in sort of looking into your research, or if not, sort of what generally you think about this at this moment.
Yeah, to be very honest, the only thing that I researched upon was the level of government intervention, and all of the other factors that you can consider. I really did not research much about these. And because had I kept all of these other factors into consideration as well, the research, I don't know, I probably would have been still writing the paper right now. Yeah.
Mhm,
But I mean, of course, with if there are always two sides to a coin, right? The we can say that the good thing about having a centrally planned economy such as that of China is that the country that you live in, your economy will do very well in the long run. But the negative, the downside to it will be that, there will be very less of consumer sovereignty as well. Yep.
mhm. Yeah, that's super interesting. I want to now ask you a little bit more about working with your peers. So you're a high school student. I imagine with the sort of experience you had at CCIR working on the economics of pandemic, something that's relatively high level. It's not high school economics or high school level mathematics or anything like that. What was it like sort of working with other peers in particular who are as passionate and let's say as nerdy as you about who's willing to spend this 14, 15, 13 weeks diving into macroeconomics, sort of learning about policy and modeling. What was it like sort of working with students like that?
Well, I mean, like, so I was working with two other students. One was from Turkey, I believe, and the other one was from the United States, and the third one, I was the third one from India. And you know, sort of the very way in which all of us looked at economics as a whole, that was quite different, right? Because for my peer from Turkey, he was kind of more into the economics of so the social welfare side of the subject, economics, right? And the one from the United States, he was more into the business side of economics, and I was more into the like sort of the global effect that economics has. And just talking about our research and our research idea, it opened a very wide spectrum of the subject as a whole. You know, that is how broad economics is.
Yeah, definitely. Sort of having these different angles and different backgrounds is something that's really, I think, quite special about the Future Scholar program, where you get to work with peers. Um, as we're sort of coming up on the 20-minute mark, I want to sort of shift gears one last time to talk a little bit about some forward-looking things. So in particular, I'm curious how this experience of doing research at this intensive level, exploring economics and so on, has influenced your sense of, let's say, where you want to go in the future and what you want to do, if at all.
Right. So, as I previously have mentioned, that I was always really interested in economics as a whole, and sort of like just because CCIR gave me this sort of like a platform where I could really dive into the subject and be very subject specific. And to be very honest, that has sort of made me more curious about what else lies in the subject of economics. And the, I mean, with this, I would like to believe that this is only the tip of the iceberg that I have just scraped through. There's a lot more to the subject, right? And yeah, I would definitely want to study economics in university as well if given the opportunity to do so. Yep.
Mhm. Excellent. So let me ask my final wrap-up question that I ask all the students in the Student Spotlight series. As a Student Spotlight Scholar, you were definitely selected because you ended up doing really good work, and we wanted to recognize this. But like the other students, you came into this program having done some research before, but not perhaps in this sort of rigorous and systematic kind of way. And for a lot of students considering a program like CCIR, they'll see students like you doing these projects on comparative economics and resilience and so on. And they might be somewhat daunted by the prospects of doing something like this. 13 weeks is a long time. And as you know, doing research is not easy. It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort. So, for a student who's, let's say, considering doing research for the first time, but a little bit daunted, a little bit scared of the prospects of this, what would you say to a student like that who is a little unsure of themselves?
Right. So like research is definitely not a piece of cake, but it is it's a learning. And I think that every student in their high school years should at least write one research paper. It really opens up uh, it really opens up your your thinking process about things that you're genuinely interested in. And I do know I know a lot of my friends who are quite scared about the entire process of writing a research paper. It is very time consuming. And a lot of this feeling of being scared is backed up by the fear of failing, the fear of not being able to write a very good research paper. And to that, the only thing I'd like to say to that is, you know, if not nothing, you'll learn something, right? Even if you don't end up writing a very good piece of academics, you will end up learning a lot more about the subject that you've chosen. So really uh just pick up any subject that you're very passionate about. It can be it can be physics, it can be economics, it can be business. Just pick any subject that you're very passionate about. And if you are genuinely passionate about it, you will find a way to write a very well researched paper. At least that was the case with me. That's how I started writing my research papers.
I think that's excellent, excellent advice. Especially the point about making sure that you're doing something that you're interested in and passionate about. Especially with something like research, because it can be grueling at times, even let's say a little bit boring. You're going through papers day after day and so on. You really do need that little spark of passion to keep you going. So I think that's excellent advice, Ishnoor. It's been wonderful chatting to you. I've really enjoyed learning a little bit more about your experience as well as your research. Um, I want to just say thank you so much, Ishnoor, for taking your time to do this interview. And I wish you best of luck in all your future endeavors and explorations of economics.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you.